Hello, I'm Pete, and today I'm joined by the writer-director of new sci-fi movie Archive. Welcome to the show, Gavin Rothery.
Hi, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here in the internet.
Good to meet you. So I'm lucky enough to have already seen Archive, but for those who haven't, can you tell us a little bit about what the film's about?
Yeah, it's a story set in like 20 years in the future, and it's about a guy who is tasked by his company to build a true AI human equivalent robot. And he basically hides his research and skews his, he kind of goes dark and uses the company resources to create a human AI equivalent of his dead wife.
Okay. So I guess tonally the film feels like it shares similar space to things like Ex Machina, The Machine, and Moon, which is a film I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. So where did the idea for Archive come from?
Well, originally, excuse me, after Moon, I had companies approaching me to production design other sci-fi films, and I wasn't really getting material that I was like super into, which pulled me into discussions about developing the material further to try and make it better. And excuse me, that pulled me into the conversations about possibly directing, and that then pulled me into further discussions about whether I had any ideas that I wanted to develop myself. So you can't turn something like that down when these kind of conversations pop up, right? What are you going to do? Like, you're going to be like, yep, I'll be back at you with something shortly. So I was looking at the kind of sci-fi. I'm a fan, right? I'm a lifelong fan. So the kind of stuff that I really like are the human science fiction stories, like the stories that are about the people. And when I look at those kind of stories, they tend to have certain ingredients and often be from a certain genre, like the 60s and the 70s were really good for those kind of stories. And I wanted to create a film that had stakes that we could buy into. So a lot of contemporary sci-fi is kind of big picture stuff, and the stakes of the film may be things like, we've got to save the Earth, got to save humanity. And I always think that stuff's a little bit big. Like, I can go with that stuff, but I prefer things that are a bit more close and personal. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to get a story together that was, the stakes were love and death, basically, which are things that the thinking behind that is that everyone's going to be able to kind of buy into this. So I had that as like a kind of a little sort of mission statement to myself. Yeah. And I had a weekend, this is back in like 2011, it's quite a while back now. I had a weekend where I was tidying up I was doing a big spring cleaning in my flat, and I had my two computers running, and working as a freelancer, like that's like your life. It's like your brain, your means, your engine, the way you make your living, it's all of your tools. And something happened, some weird powered surge, I don't know what, but all the power went off. And when it came back on, my computers didn't. And they were just destroyed. And I lost data, all kinds of stuff. It was really bad. And this happened whilst my house was completely trashed, because when you're doing a spring clean, you've got to make everything messy before you can tidy up again. So I had to like power on with this worst tidy up in my life, knowing that my computers were just destroyed. And it was awful. It put me in a really bad place psychologically. I was really grumpy.
I was stressed out just hearing.
And it felt like these computers had done it on purpose, and they were trying to spite me. Right. And I had this like idea of my computers basically committing suicide to spite me. And it occurred to me that was actually quite a compelling idea. It's kind of had a kind of a Philip K. Dick kind of quality to it that I quite enjoyed. So that then, whenever you're trying to come up with a story, often you have an idea, but the idea isn't the story. So you have the idea, and then you have to find the story in the idea. So that was the idea. And then the story quite quickly became, well, if somebody created this machine equivalent, a human equivalent AI machine, and they turned it on, and it didn't want to live, as soon as it turned it on, it like killed itself. Like, the story then is like, how do they keep it alive long enough to find out why it wants to die? And that really sort of sent me down a path. So that, combined with the themes of love and death, it only took me about 6 weeks to work the story out at that point, and that became Archive. The one frustrating thing about it, because it was my first film, it took a long time to get things made. And this was back in 2011 when I figured all this stuff out. And since then, it's quite zeitgeisty ideas, right? The idea of using machines to survive death and store consciousness and stuff. So since then, we've had things like Ex Machina and Black Mirror, which have got somewhat there's some commonality there. There's the kind of ideas that are in the kind of, you know, popular space that people are exploring. So yeah, that was the core of the idea that thrust through to become Archive.
Okay. So you mentioned it took a while in development. So I guess this is your first feature as writer-director, but you made a short of The Last Man before this. So how was that leap for you from a short film to making your first feature?
Well, the short film was really shaking things down. Archive was already in development when I made The Last Man, and it was really an opportunity for my producer Philip Hurd and myself to work together. Actually, just get in the trenches a little bit, shake a few things down, meet a few people, work with a few crew, try and pull a few people into our orbit, and just kind of keep moving forwards, basically.
Makes sense. And you've got a great cast in this film. There's Theo James, Stacey Martin, supported ably by Rona Mitra, and one of my favourites, Toby Jones. So what was it like working with that cast?
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, just look at that list of names you just reeled off there. Like Toby Jones, like what a dude. Like everybody was wonderful. I mean, obviously Theo and Stacey as the core, the kind of core kind of actor presence in the film. Those guys are great. The chemistry they had together was wonderful. The film needed a certain chemistry to it because I'm quite skeptical and cynical. We're all the audience, right? And there's never been audiences with a level of sophistication that there is today. Like we've seen so much, we've read so much, watched so much TV, so many films, we've listened to so much music. Like we know what we like, we've heard lots and lots of it. And so we know what we like. And so it's hard to get things past people, right? Like we're a sophisticated audience. And I really wanted the two main characters in Archive to feel like they had a real connection with each other. Mm. And it's hard to do that in film because you only have so much time on screen to be able to sell that. And most films generally they'll simplify things, and what they'll do is they'll portray love as being like two beautiful people kissing, like that's love. And I wanted to get into a bit more of the kind of banter and the kind of backwards and forwards side of things rather than the beautiful people kissing underneath the sunset. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, they were great for that. Theo and Stacey were wonderful for that. They really kind of brought it.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think that took away from the film is it certainly feels like a very believable, like you say, three-dimensional relationship, really, rather than just something on the surface.
And I think with sci-fi, it's really important too because you are creating a fantasy world, and I like things that feel grounded because it gives you that hook, especially when the stakes that I'm asking people to buy into are very kind of, I won't say they're mundane because there's nothing mundane about love, and there's certainly nothing mundane about death, but they are very relatable in the sense that it's our world. Like, we have that in and out of our world, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I think being grounding things in that sense, I find that stuff's great because if you can ground things in that sense, it gives you the license to do all the kind of creative world building sci-fi stuff on the other sense. And then when you put those two things together, I think you get a really nice, a nice mix.
I know what you mean. Like, I guess, yeah, you've got to suspend your disbelief to a certain amount. So you need the character stuff to be believable to let you do that. That makes sense.
Yeah, you need a solid foundation to be able to, do the fantasy type stuff. But I mean, you can't do that without great actors. And fortunately, those guys had it in spades. They were so cool to work with as well. It's like, if you think about it, like you shouldn't like these people. They're all really beautiful and really intelligent and witty and funny, and like these guys should be the people that you don't like. It's like, oh, they're just so cool and charming though. You can't help but love these people, honestly. Like being able to work with them to realize the film was just a joy.
That's great to hear. So we mentioned Moon earlier, and you played a key role in that movie. So what was your involvement? How did that all come about?
Well, Moon itself came about because myself and Duncan Jones, we met at a games company and became friends back in 97 something, 8, and we basically moved in together and spent 10 years trying to make a film. Duncan was just out of film school. I was working at a games company and I wanted to like up my art. So I was doing real-time graphics at the time, concept art, and I wanted to get into VFX. So we just moved in together and just started working on everything. It took 10 years. We had a couple of false starts. We ended up working through, low budget promo videos through into smaller budget test pieces, then into like, we ended up doing like some really like top level TV commercials together. And we were just working as a creative team basically. And all the time we were doing the advertising stuff and the promo stuff, we were trying to get a film made. And eventually we ended up making Moon. So yeah, that whole film was just me and Duncan living in a flat together, just putting all of our ideas in a pot, watching repeat seasons of 24, getting mildly obsessed with Jack Bauer, and just talking about how we wanted to what this sci-fi film was going to, what could we do, what could we pull off. Like, you know, nobody, when you're starting off, nobody really cares. Like, you have to be ready for that. I mean, you know, this is like, you know, Duncan, like his dad's David Bowie, no one really cares. Like, you've got to do it yourself. Like, you know, no one cares. Like, you've got to prove yourself. You got to get off your bum and prove yourself. So that's what we did.
That makes sense. So that kind of, I guess, segues quite. You've mentioned you've got visual effects background, as have I, and before that you've worked in games and also comics. And now you've established yourself as a filmmaker. So how was that transition, or how did that kind of how did you make that shift?
It might sound a bit cliched, but when I look back at it, I basically gone in a big circle. Excuse me. So what I mean by that, I didn't plan this. It wasn't like, you know, I was at school and I was like, one day I'm going to make a sci-fi film. I never even thought that was possible. The reason why it wasn't on my radar is because I never thought I'd be able to do that. The most I thought I might be able to do was maybe draw for 2000 AD, maybe draw some Judge Dredd or some Strontium Dog for 2000 AD. So that was my whole goal, to be a comic artist. And then when I was young, I had a creative partner called Steve Tagg, and we used to make comics together. He'd write, I'd draw, we'd put all our ideas in a pot. You know, he'd do all the lettering, I'd do all the art, and we started doing small press stuff and getting a bit of attention like that, and it was awesome. We just make up comics. And it tended to be sci-fi stuff because we wanted to work for 2000 AD. So it was all stuff that we were hoping might, you know, we were kind of making our own 2000 AD basically. And that was awesome. And that then led to me graduating university with a degree in graphic design, specializing in illustration, which I was like, I'm going to be comics, just going to do comics, that's fine. And then when I graduated in 1996, the bottom fell out of the comics industry because Sony launched the PlayStation in like 95, and they marketed it really well, and they made games cool, and everything was going to 3D and going next gen, and it was all about games. So all these game studios started sprouting up just as the comic industry was really kind of receding into the waters. And so I found that all the skills that I'd been developing to be a comic artist were applicable for the games industry. So I ended up kind of falling into the games industry really, and I still work in the games industry now. It's cool being a writer director, but when you do your first film, you've got to be prepared for that period where we finished Archive in February 2020, but we finished shooting in December, very end of December in 2018. Okay. So as a writer director, you get paid when you're shooting. That's when you really get paid. Yeah. So basically, I haven't been paid to work on a film for 2 years now. So you have to have another job. Like, that would be one of the big bits of advice, is have 2 jobs. Yeah. So yeah, that was a whole thing. But working in the games industry, then, you know, one big part of this is half of everything is luck. So if you stick around for a while, you'll have some luck. Good luck, bad luck, you'll have both. But when you get some good luck, don't be shy about it. Just grab hold of it and just go for the ride, you know. So, you know, I met Duncan. I mean, it was lucky for us both because Moon was both of us combining our everything we had basically to make the film. So yeah, that got me into production really, working with Duncan. And he'd just come out of film school, so he knew what was going on with production. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was just a sci-fi artist wanting to kind of up my game, and I felt like I knew I was swimming in the shallow end of graphics, because doing real-time stuff in 2020, you know, you're making 200 polygon characters, you know, it's nothing like it is today. So I wanted to get into the higher end tools of the software, because I'm sat there with my copy of 3D Studio Max. Excuse me. It's got all these fancy tools in there, and I'm just not using them. So I started working on Duncan with things and just trying to get into the higher end graphics. just doing it myself at home. So yeah, that led into us working together. That led into us ultimately putting all of our ideas, getting frustrated. Moon came from frustration. You know, we've been at it for a few years at that point, and we hadn't cracked it, and we were starting to really feel like it was never going to happen. So we went full bore. Let's just get this done.
Fair play. That certainly paid off.
What's your background in VFX, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm a visual effects producer, a studio in Cardiff, but I also write comics, and I'm just pivoting towards writing for screen. So it's interesting for me.
Okay.
What you've been doing.
You're me, basically, pretty much.
Yeah, you probably know a lot of the same people, actually. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Before we wrap up, then, is there anything else you'd like to say about Archive other than everyone should go and see it?
Yeah, just exactly that, really. Please go see my film. A bunch of super talented people worked really hard on it, so hopefully you can enjoy it. I would just say that Laurie Rose, who did the cinematography, and Stephen Price, who did the music, were particular standout collaborations for me. I loved working with those guys, and hopefully you'll enjoy what they've done. I mean, the soundtrack that Stephen Price wrote was just, I don't feel like I deserve it. It makes me feel like a very special boy being able to work with him. So I'm just very grateful for those guys.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you're very grounded. I think that's a good way, and a good collaborator, which I think will stand you in good stead in the future. So good luck.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, that's a great thing about doing things like this. You know, you get to work with all these fantastic people and bring all of their skills into a point. Good stuff.
Nice one. Thank you very much.